Good morning, everybody. My name is Sophie De Bodisco. I'm based at the British Embassy in Paris. I'm helping British companies to develop their business in France. I'm leading on creative industries, meaning design, film, TV, animation, advertising, whatever. There are like 11 sectors. I'm head also of the consumer team in France. So if you have any questions about exporting to France, please come see me at the end of the presentation. But today I'd like to introduce you to our three speakers. The first one will be Josh Valman. He's the managing director of RPD International, which is a design and manufacturing company operating a global supply chain of creative individuals, suppliers, and factories. Josh began his engineering career at 10 years old with a fascination in robotics. By age 15, he was consulting on supply chain and engineering for some of the world's largest manufacturing companies. Now provides product design, manufacturing, and supply chain solutions to companies across Europe, Asia, and America. Clients include airlines, hotels, manufacturers, retailers, brands, and startups. Josh. I'd like to introduce you to Keith, also Graham, who's managing partner at Westbury, chartered accountants and business advisors based in London. He is passionate about modern art and works with creatives, artists, and galleries in various stages, from startup through to established well-known companies. Westbury guides clients to the right fiscal structure for their business and ensuring that they know what is expected of them from HMRC, companies' houses, etc. Keith works together with clients to identify ways in which to automate financial system, leaving them free to focus on the creative side of their business and not the administration. Our third speaker today is Sebastian Cox, and Sebastian is a designer and craftsman dedicated to proving that sustainable design does not have to result in a compromised product. He established the Sebastian Cox workshop to design and make fine objects from sustainable hardwoods and overlooked by other designers and makers. Today, with the help of his team, he uses his devotion to wood, curiosity, inventiveness, award-winning design, and exquisite craftsmanship to make beautiful, useful, and completely sustainable objects. He wins awards and is entrusted with prestigious individual client commissions, collections for iconic retailers like Hills and the New Craftsman, partnerships with interior designers, and collaborations with Benchmark. I'd like now to let Josh Valman start his presentation. Thank you.
Morning. First, I'm going to apologise because I tend to walk around and I've only got one microphone, so if you can't hear me, start waving and dancing and jumping around. Before I tell you about me, who am I talking to? How many people here are technical engineers, designers? Like 4 of you. How many people are sort of business operations? And how many people are lost? Ooh, thank you. There we go. So I will very quickly introduce me and tell you a bit about what we do, and then I want to talk about supply chain and data and how all these boring things come together to build design companies. So somebody said earlier, I started my engineering career when I was about 10 years old. Who remembers Robot Wars? Yeah, geeks. I got involved in that a long time ago now, and behind Robot Wars is actually like a proper design and engineering competition. You know, it's well funded, there's lots of corporate sponsors, there's lots of PhD doctors, there's lots of people who are very intelligent and know what they're doing, and there was me. I turned up with my parents, I had flashing lights in my trainers, I have both parents with me and remote control toys, and everybody else had a proper organisation going on, but I didn't see any problem with that. So I started playing and designing things and creating things, and I got to the point where actually sort of the stuff that I was designing, in Google SketchUp and quite preliminary design programs was just beyond what I could produce at home. So I started sort of going to factories and trying to find someone who could run machines for me and produce the parts that I was designing. It turns out I couldn't afford much in the UK, so everybody used to say, oh, well, you should go to China. And at that point it was a joke, but actually this was before the Chinese economy really understood how the Western world was using Google to do business. So the easiest way to find a Chinese factory is to Google Chinese factory. And at this time we were lucky enough that the only people in China using Chinese factory as a keyword on Google were people who'd come from the West, from the UK, from Europe, from America, and taken their manufacturing abroad. And so I was quite lucky in finding Western people running these factories and being able to communicate with them very easily. And so I continued making these parts and designing crazy things, and I sort of had the full scope of a factory to let loose. And that got me into quite a funny position, because I started designing things that were a little bit crazy, a little bit wild, and turning up to these events, and people should start to see them. Very luckily, all of the people that were there were all, they're professional engineers. They come from Rolls-Royce, they come from BAE, and all of their friends are also very professional engineers. And they started to say, well, can you fix this problem? Can you do this? Can you make this? And I got myself into trouble. I was 15, I started consulting with public companies on supply chain. Nobody thought to ask how old I was. Nobody even considered that I might be underage or unqualified or still at school. And I spent 2.5 years controlling about $20 million of supply chain a week, and nobody thought to ask. So that was fun. And I was doing everything from redesigning molds to dictating what kind of factories people should use or how they should structure their factory organizations. Just insane amounts of reliability, and nobody thought to ask. And the reason why that was possible was because actually a lot of supply chain is based on sort of hierarchy, and it's based on legacy. People know how it works for the last 50, 100 years, and they just keep moving with it. And the value that I was able to bring to the table is having absolutely no idea how these things should work, which is actually quite an interesting approach. So when I was about 17, somebody found out how old I was. I got fired very quickly. Lots of contracts. Everybody had to pretend it never ever happened. And I moved on to try and create something that was more about how do you recreate that situation? How do you recreate that almost complete ignorance to how things should work in a company that can deliver that to large corporations? Now we're, with contractors, almost 100 people. We've got over 100 factories in 40 countries. We're doing R&D through to mass production for everything from mobile phones to phone cows and marketing displays and POS and things like that. But it's quite an interesting problem to solve, because the state of the global manufacturing economy is totally and utterly broken. Coca-Cola, there is a book by Kevin Ashton that I read on a flight the other day, and actually there isn't a single person in the world that knows how to make a can of Coke. Not even the CEO of Coke knows how to make a can of Coke. There isn't anybody who understands that full supply chain, because it's that complicated. Our kind of reliance on the globe for physical items is becoming so vast and so similar to the way we rely on the globe in a digital sense, that it's becoming out of control. It's making supply chains so big and so kind of just inoperable that people can't adapt, they can't move, they can't evolve as quick as the economy and as quick as the society are moving. So Coke starts in Australia. You can mine bauxite by scraping it off the ground. You can reduce it down, it becomes aluminium, and they make these massive rods from them. And then all of that is shipped 5,000 miles to America before they even think about making cans from it. Where it's rolled out, it's pressed into cans. They use 7 layers of paint on the inside and the outside because Coke is that corrosive. So keep drinking, you're fine. Then it goes to Atlanta. So Coke is made up of syrup that's all made in Atlanta and shipped around the world. So they have one sort of core base for making this syrup, and then it's mixed with water and carbon dioxide. So everything has to go to America to come back out and come to Europe and wherever else, which is madness. But Coke itself is actually made up of lots of other things as well. So you've got vanilla that comes from Mexican orchids. So you have a load of people picking flowers, picking them apart, putting them in boxes, and that's your Coca-Cola. You have cola nuts that come from an African rainforest. There are literally people walking around a rainforest, picking up these nuts, put them in boxes, and they ship all the way around the world to make your can of Coke. And then the funniest one is cinnamon. So we actually saw a cinnamon factory for Coca-Cola, and it's a load of people with bark from a tree just scraping it into boxes. And that's where your can of Coke comes from that you just bought downstairs. And all of that comes together to go into a can. And now these machines are producing about 5 million cans a day. They get boxed up, they get shipped out. But that whole supply chain is dependent on at least 20 countries. In some cases, dependent on 40 countries, depending on where it's being shipped to. And that's insane. It puts you in a position where actually, you can't move. If you got feedback from a customer saying we need to change this, it takes you about 2 years to change that because the supply chain is so vast. So I'm rushing through this. I'm trying to get it in 10 minutes before I get kicked off the stage. So our big mission is, how do you create a 0-mile supply chain? How do you create a supply chain that's small enough to reduce the economic and the environmental impact of shipping things around the world, but also nimble enough so that when you get feedback from customers and you understand how people use your products and use your company and your process, you can change that and you can adapt it and you can move as you go. There's just a hilarious amount of truck miles are spent every day by big companies. We were at P&G the other day, and that was 1.5 billion truck miles every year to ship P&G products around the world. It's an incredible cost and it's incredible time. So we got an opportunity last year to kind of play with that. We had an airline come to us. They came with a check and they said, start again, design our airline again, design everything, design the way we sit in a plane, design what a plane is, design how tickets are, what do people do on a plane, everything. Which sort of started us from real basics. We spoke to their market research department. They spend millions and millions of pounds a year on market research, and we asked them, what do they know? And truth be told, millions and millions of pounds, and those knowing absolutely nothing. And the biggest problem with market research is actually you know nothing. The people you ask know nothing, your boss knows nothing, and your juniors know nothing. Because as soon as you ask a human being what they think, it's not what they think that they tell you. You just cannot relate how you actually think, use, feel an object into answers to a questionnaire. However you pose that questionnaire, however much money you spend on that questionnaire. Sorry, PR companies. So we kind of started setting about trying to build an operation that would allow us to create a supply chain that allows you to learn from that. So we started creating objects like headphones that would tell you how these things are used. I mean, these headphones, they have a clear earbud on them, but under pressure it changes colour. So we were able to record, do these headphones hurt more in men than women, on children than adults? And we brought all that data back together and we created a supply chain that would allow you to have that consistent feedback loop. So, you have a load of people on one flight, they wear these headphones, you correlate it with the entertainment data, and every hour men always take these headphones out for 10 minutes. And you start to look at the data and you realise that actually, okay, so some people are watching a series, it's an hour long, every 10 minutes they go and they take their headphones off and they have a break. But what about the people who are watching a 2.5 hour film and they still take them off every 10 minutes? And that's when you start to realise that maybe there's something wrong here. You look at the pressure of their headphones, and maybe there's a higher pressure in men than women, and you can very quickly adapt these designs to suit. And you end up with a design of earbuds that's slightly different, but suits much better to men than it does to women, or to adults, to children. And it's all this kind of thing. And we put sensors in everything, in seats. We design ways that you can record how a tray was used, how a tray gets bashed. Pieces that are made to break, made to wear, sensors that tell you how things are being moved around, and you record all that data and you correlate it. And then we designed a way that actually you could use that data. So not only now do you have usage data that's real of how people use your process, use your products, you've now got data on, or a way to execute on that data. So we designed a way that they can have a supply chain in each of the countries they land in, and you can have a 24-hour design period. So every iteration on every product took no more than 3 days. You can have something, you can use it, you put it on the plane, you get it back, you can see the data, you change your design, within 3 days you've got something ready to go again, ready to be manufactured, which is when you hit the next big problem. Manufacturing tends to consist of 50 days to make anything, 50 days to ship anything, and then 50 days of bureaucracy and paying people. Not a big fan of that. So looking at how sort of modern manufacturing techniques are, we started to design a supply chain that will allow you to not ship products. You start shipping raw material and you start shipping data. Things like 3D printing are still very rudimental in terms of large-scale production, even though it's been around for 30, 40 years. But how can you use that to do smaller scale production and learn from that, so that when you go to produce something, en masse in an injection molding factory, in a proper facility, actually what you're producing is far closer to what the customer wants and needs, rather than this assumption of market research and what people think. So we started setting up these little factories everywhere to design and assemble stuff every time the data came back, and we ended up running 10 design tracks. So everything being shipped was raw material, but the actual design and changes being shipped were all digital. And it puts you in a really strange position where actually you can load a new prototype on a plane every single day. Every time the plane lands, you can take everything off it, you can put everything back on, totally different, and you can evolve and evolve and evolve and evolve. And that is where you end up with a very, very useful supply chain. So not only is your supply chain for development, days long instead of months and years long, but your supply chain is allowed to evolve, and you use that supply chain to develop. And it's that data that allows you to create companies and products that fit what it is your customer needs and wants, rather than trying to make assumptions and using questionnaires and all that rubbish that doesn't necessarily work. There we go, somebody cut out all my slides so I'd be shorter. So the 3 key things that I'm going to end on today, which are maybe relevant to you, maybe not, but the key thing for me is about logistics is terrible. Whether that's communication between a company or it's shipping things around the world, logistics is terrible for time and money. How can you cut logistics? How can you reduce it to sending data? How can you reduce any step along the way? Because every step you create is an opportunity for failure. The second point is You have no idea what you're thinking. You know nothing, your boss knows nothing, and nobody you employ knows anything. Try and understand how things are actually used, what actually happens. Whether you're building a business and a process or a product for somebody, understand what happens, how it's used, record that data, and build an operation that can actually develop off of that. Because the third point is that development is never ever over. There is never a point where you say, okay, I'm ready for 5 million, unless your next step is to make 10 million. You never ever ever stop developing. Nothing is ever ever done. Because if ever you think you're done, within 2 weeks you're out of date and you have to start again. That'll do. Thank you very much. Have fun.
Thank you very much, Josh. I'd like to introduce now, let me move a little bit, Keith Graham from Westbury. Do you want to be,
I'll go to that.
yeah?
No.
Yes.
Yes. Good. Thanks, Josh. That was very interesting. I'm going to actually step back a bit from Josh's interesting story about how his business has developed to some of the fundamentals that you need to get right in your business, in any business. My background is that I'm an accountant in practice. I run a practice with about 45 people in it. And I'm also a shareholder and director of a company, an internet company with about 55 people in it. So I've spent my whole career looking after advising startup businesses and more strongly developed businesses and some multinational businesses from day one right the way through. And I should warn you, I'm going to run through stuff very quickly because this is a talk I normally give. It normally takes about an hour or an hour and a half, so apologies for that. So I want to start with a brief story. About 10, 15 years ago, someone came along to me to see me, wanting some advice. He was leaving a major design agency. He was starting a new business on his own, and he didn't know what to do. I asked him what his business was. He was designing telephones. It was probably actually 20 years ago. And I looked at him and I said, but, you know, what sort of market is there in that? And he said to me, well, just go into Dixon's at that time and have a look on the wall at how many different phones there are, and then go in a week later and see how many new phones there are, and then go in a week after that. And I realised I didn't realise very much about the designing of phones. He then built that business up within about 5 years to a multi-million-pound business. And he did it by sticking to some fundamentals. Those fundamentals are, I'm listed them here, and I want to just start off with the issue about what differentiates you. Because, you have to have a USP. In Josh's case, quite clearly when he started, his USP was his self-confidence and self-belief. Which came over very clearly. But every business has got something special. It's that something special that you can do that differentiates you from everybody else. But actually, business is business, and these fundamentals apply to every business. So just running through very quickly, you have to have the right people around you. You have to make sure you recruit the right people. It's worth spending a lot of time doing that, because if you don't have the right people on the bus, as the phrase goes, your business will not develop. You've got to build systems, and that's actually something that came out very strongly in Josh's talk, particularly about Coca-Cola. The whole system, the whole business of Coca-Cola is built on systems, all different sorts of systems. And you may think, well, that's nothing to do with me. I'm not Coca-Cola. I'm just a one-man band, or I'm just starting up, or I've only got 2 people. But actually, that's just one type of system. One of the most basic systems I can think of is, how is your phone answered? Do you have a set way of answering the phone to make sure that you keep a potential customer engaged? Do you make sure that the people answering the phone do the same thing every time they answer the phone? That's a system. And every business needs all these systems in place. And the more you have of these systems, the less you have to reinvent the wheel, the easier it is to train people, because you just say to them, this is what we do. And the smoother the business runs, and the less problems that you as the owner of the business have, which releases your time to develop the business. And the third area is management. You have to manage your business. You can't just expect that it's just going to run itself. You have to take control. Now, very briefly, as an accountant, you would expect me to talk about numbers. So there's a famous phrase which says, what you can measure, you can manage. What that means is that in order to keep track of your business, in order to know where you're going, in order to see where you're doing badly, where you're doing well, what you can improve, you need to measure things. It's very important also because you may, in the early days of a business, be short of finance, so it's even more critical if you're having discussions with your bank that you're on top of where you're going, what your needs are. It ties in a way with business structures and with tax, and I'll come to tax in a moment and business structures briefly. But you need to have the right systems in place, and those systems are built around, the age-old bookkeeping, I'm afraid. You have to keep decent records. How do you keep track? How do you keep track of your figures? Well, I've come across all sorts in my career. There's the Dickens approach, which is a good old piece of paper or a ledger that you can buy from Smith's or Ryman's, and a quill pen, and you can write it all out longhand, and you can be up all night doing it. You can use spreadsheets. Nowadays, the most common and the best way is to use cloud-based software, which is available very cheaply. Software like Xero, which is the main one that actually we recommend. And the other aspect of this is that you're keeping records of your business, you're keeping track of how you're doing, but is it you that's going to do it, or have you got to a size where actually it takes up too much time and you need to delegate it? And if so, find the right person to do that. It's not expensive, but you do need to keep those records up to date. Tax, very briefly. This can be a major expense for your business. You have to have an understanding of where it impacts on you. You have to a basic understanding of the timing of payments that you have to make. And that can cover, most businesses are going to be registered for VAT. You're going to have employees, so you're going to have PAYE to pay every month. You will have tax on your profits, income tax, or if you're a company, corporate taxes. So it's vital in looking at your cash flow that, as I said before, that you're in control of where you're going. And I listed under tax here as well expenses, because it's very easy to lose sight of your expenses, not to realise what you're spending on things, and also not to claim things that you should be claiming, all of which reduce your tax bills. So in summary, as I said, this is a whistle-stop tour. In summary, business is serious. It may have come out of design college. You may have had a spark of an idea, and it might be a hobby that's developed into a business. But if you're going to make it a successful business, you have to take it seriously, and you have to do the serious stuff. You must take control of it. It won't run without you actually keeping an eye on everything that it's doing. You've got to keep good records. You must plan for your tax bills, and you must take good advice. And just to finish off with a little bit of self-publicity. We published a book, very, very, very readable book. It'll take you an hour and a half to read it, on how to run a business. And if you'd like to leave me your card afterwards, or my colleague Grant, who is with his arm up over there, we'll happily send you either a digital version or a hardback if you prefer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Sebastian Cox to join us now, please?
No, I'm okay. I'll talk here. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. My name's Sebastian Cox, and I am a designer and a craftsman. I suppose what differentiates me from the other speakers is that I have found myself running a business, actually, because my passion is to design and make things, and I have goals outside of just sort of running a business. And I think I'm probably naturally a salesman, and I'm good at designing things, but I don't think I'm naturally an entrepreneur. So I've had to learn a lot of these skills, and I surround myself with people who can help me with that. I'm really motivated by environmental sustainability, and I love making things, which is a challenge, because obviously one of the problems with sustainability is that we have a lot of stuff. One thing that really, I think, highlights sort of one of the challenges that I'm trying to tackle is that in the UK, since the Second World War, woodland cover has increased, but biodiversity has decreased. And that's because we aren't managing the woodlands that we have here. Part of managing woodlands is that you have to use the trees. So my business is focused around creating desirable products which use woodlands, which benefits the environment, and it gives consumers really nice things. So we're not going to do all of that today. I'm going to keep it quite short. I'm going to look at what I do through some of the projects that I've done, starting with my graduate collection, which I think for some of you here who may be kind of graduate designers thinking about setting up a business, I suppose this is kind of relevant because it was the thing that launched my business and got me going. I started with a problem, which is always a good place to start with design. We have 2.8 million hectares of overstood woodland in the UK, and we import more timber than we export. Most of our timber is imported in the UK. So I thought that, well, we've got a resource growing here that is currently being harvested with government money, and most of it just ends up on a bonfire. So if we can use design and kind of think cleverly about how we procure and use that material, then we can create beautiful products that sell to people who are happy with what they've bought, that don't damage the planet, and at the same time we're promoting habitat and wildlife. So this is a very typical coppiced hazel chair that you might find very, very woodlandy, very rustic. I wanted to do something that was really refined. I wanted to make it a sophisticated product that was desirable to sort of, contemporary design market. And I started with the material, which is a really fun way to develop products. So it's hugely kind of inspiring, and there's a really rich resource of different methods, different tools that you can really draw on and kind of develop different textures and surfaces and things. This is my workshop at the moment. Speaking about systems, this is a system. At the moment we harvest the wood in Kent in the winter, and we bring it to my workshop. We plane it, bandsaw it, stack it and dry it, and then we make products for retailers like Heels, and we've got products available through our website, Interior Designers, which we then sell. So I started looking at things like weaving, combining that with machine textures to try and create something that really resonated with the woodland origin of the pieces, but equally was going to sit comfortably in a modern interior. And I looked at other more complicated things which I don't really have time to go through. I was at one point thinking about making MDF out of coppice hazel, and my tutor on my MA said, "You're doing a Master of Arts, not a Master of Science. Get back in the workshop and make some furniture." But I did make a nice light. This collection was quite a big sort of milestone for my business quite early on. I collaborated with a manufacturer called Benchmark, because I quickly realised that although I had products which I was making in my workshop, me making 6 chairs a quarter in my workshop wasn't actually solving any of the issues of using woodland. So Benchmark have got a massive factory. They turn over quite a lot, and they've got 70 staff, and they're really, really great. And I learnt a lot about them, about their systems and what they do. And it was quite fun because I was bringing green woodworking, which is the woodworking that's normally associated with woodlands, into a place which produces a lot of furniture from kiln-dried hardwoods. By upscaling the production, we had to upscale the supply, and I found a wood in Kent which has 900 acres of continuously managed coppice chestnut, which is cleft into fencing staves and shipped globally. It's an amazing business, and they, from a little wood, 900 acre wood in Kent, they actually produce 11 linear kilometres of fencing a week. So they've got really, really big ability to supply us with lots of chestnut, and that's kind of where we started. And then I took the material into Benchmark's workshop and started developing the products with their craftsmen and their design team, and it was great because I was taking tools and materials into a workshop that's been going for 30 years, and these guys, these craftsmen like Pete here, has never seen these processes and these tools, because green woodworking is quite distinct from working with conventional kiln-dried hardwoods. So one of the processes that we really got involved with was cleaving, which is the controlled splitting of wood, and that really informed a lot of the design. It's a texture that appears in all of the pieces, like the rails on the side table there and in the backs, and indeed on the cabinet as well. That's all cleft fronted. So that's what we ended up with, and it launched at Clerkenwell last year and continues to sell well. Underwood was going back to the woods and sort of reassessing the collection. I wanted to create products that had a slightly lower access point, so it's a slightly lower price point than the other things that I've been creating. So you can buy into the woodland story, and you can help with actually using up hardwoods. You can buy a candelabra for 30 quid or a bench for 300 quid, and they're still handmade in my workshop. But it's all about simplifying the design, keep paring it right back, keeping it really, really simple, not overcomplicating anything. Rushing through a bit, this is last year's sort of big project for me, which is actually on show down on the Wood Awards stand. It's been shortlisted this year. This is a desk I made for this guy, Sir Terence Conran, who's an absolute champion. And he wanted a desk that he could shut himself away in and get away from it all, which is the title of the piece. And this is the drawing that he gave me, which is still on my wall in my living room. He was quite prescriptive about what he wanted. He wanted a cotton curtain around to sort of shut himself away, and I had to kind of go and tell Sir Terence Conran that actually a cotton curtain was not going to be as nice as a woven screen. So it was quite a challenge in convincing this sort of hero of mine to do something different. And this is the drawing of what we ended up with. To do the weaving, one of the methods that I used to convince Terence was that I said, we'll use your river on your estate to actually soak the wood to return it to its green state, so make it really supple. So we'll be using the landscape here to actually create the piece, and he utterly adored that idea. Although the fishermen who pay £1,000 a day to fish trout on that spot of river were really cross. Being the biggest kind of commission I had ever undertaken, I wanted to throw every cabinet maker's trick in there. So we had rolling timbres, and we had a secret hidden drawer, and I think it had 12 other drawers, sliding doors. It had the lot, and it was a real kind of challenge in making sense. And we only had a week to make it because it was part of a wider project called the Wish List, and we had 1 week. Late nights. And that's the piece as it finished up, and as I say, you can see it down there on the Wood Awards stand. This is something I designed earlier this year that's launched at Clerkenwell Design Week, and it's called the Sebastian Cox kitchen for a kitchen company called Devol. One of the things, picking up on what Josh said about supply chains, one of the things I'm really interested in is the fact that our consumers don't necessarily know what's going on in the forest and where that comes from. And that's quite a small and probably relatively uncomplicated supply chain in comparison with Coca-Cola, but there's still a disconnect there. So because we harvest timber, I understand what that's like in the woodland, but equally I sell furniture, so I understand that too. And talking to the foresters, and they're saying, we can't shift English beech. It's out of fashion, and the timber yards can't sell it, and it's at rock bottom prices. And I thought, well, let's make this year, we'll do a project about beech. And I was thinking about what we could do. It has lovely connotations with food preparation. A lot of the wooden spoons in your house will be made of beech. Butcher's blocks used to be beech. So I approached Devol, who we'd already been talking about doing something together, and we thought, well, let's make a kitchen from beech. And then the way to do that was to kind of subtly present beech in different ways. So it has the sort of normal qualities of beech, but equally we've sort of used inky stains and nice colours. And we put woven panels in, which at the back, because obviously you don't want them at the front, difficult to clean, etc. The Invisible Store of Happiness is another it's another thing that's here actually, just down there. This is another massive challenge, just an enormous thing to make. I really wanted to collaborate with a sculptor, just to kind of show the diversity of things we can make in our workshop. We're very proud. We are a proper workshop that makes stuff. And this was a massive challenge. And this was about using cherry, which is a wood that hasn't sold well in the UK for 10 or 15 years. And we're trying to sort of elevate the status with a really show-stopping piece for Clerkenwell Design Week. As I say, it was the biggest thing we'd ever made. It's got 450 mortise and tenon joints, and steam bent arcs which go in by 40mm increments. I think we designed it more complicated than anything we've ever designed before, and it was a real challenge to make. And this is Laura wonderful sculptor who was teaching us how to kind of manipulate wood in a sort of free way, and how to respond to space within the design. And this is the piece in the arch, St John's Arch. And finally, this is Bayleaf. This is a collection that we're launching this year. We have launched this year at Decorex, which is now finished. And this is about, it's called Bayleaf. It was inspired by a medieval house in Sussex, and this is the house. And it's about the sort of logic and simplicity of the design of this era. They had a really limited palette of materials, and we have a huge broad palette of materials. There are materials being invented every single day, but they understood that really narrow palette really, really well. So we've designed different products which have different characteristics. And this is an example of that actually really beautifully. Next to the house is a watermill. In this watermill, you have an oak shaft that comes up. The outer rim of the wheel is elm, the spindles are ash, and then the teeth in the cog are alternatively hornbeam and apple. So if there's a jam, the apple breaks first, because it's soft, then the hornbeam, because it's slightly harder, and it comes from a hedge. Then the ash spindles, they're pretty cheap. Then the elm, that's getting quite expensive. And then the last thing to break is your really expensive oak shaft. So they had such a thorough understanding of wood, which we just commonly think of as just wood. But one of the things that we do is we think really broadly about wood and understand species and what's in supply, what's not in fashion, and we try and match those things together. And we also drew sort of visual characteristics from, the place, which is really beautiful. And this is the dining table, which is ebonized oak, English oak, with lacewood top. And that's it. Thank you. Not questions yet.
I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation, and I'd like to ask you if you have any questions for our speakers. You.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question of Sebastian. You obviously started off as a designer craftsman, but now you've got presumably a team that helps you in your workshop. How did you go? How did you go at scaling from one person to having a team? That seems to be quite a difficult transition point for a designer maker.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Is that loud enough? Yeah. That was a difficult thing, and I have lots of students that sort of come to my workshop just to see what happens, and kind of you get to know people, and I've never done any sort of big recruiting plan, but I just met people that I just thought, actually, I can't really afford you, but I really like you, and so offered them a job even though I couldn't quite afford it. And now they are at such an integral part of the team. What I found was that I made sure that each individual project kind of paid for their time, and it was difficult because I couldn't put them straight on the PAYE and kind of give them a salary, but I could offer them sporadic work. And it just kind of grew from there, really. I found that by having them in the workshop, it actually frees me up to be a designer. And as much as I am a craftsman and a maker, having them there supports me in my making, and it means that I can answer the phone or go out and meet someone in London or whatever. So it's really difficult. There wasn't sort of one pivotal moment where I just said, yeah, we're going to have staff now. It just kind of grew. They came to me as students. I mean, they came to me as students. They worked during the summer to start, and George first, then Joe, and George used to come in at weekends, and he just kind of familiarised himself with the workshop, and I kind of realised how brilliant they were, and just I've had to kind of grow with them, really. I'm afraid it's not like there's no sort of magic kind of sum of money that arrives and suddenly you can afford staff, or you don't wake up one morning and go, do you know what, I'm going to employ 2 people. They just kind of turn up, and if they're really good, if they're really great people, not necessarily good makers, I've had to teach them quite a lot, but if they're good people, you tend to want to keep them.
Thank you. Oh.
Hi, my question's for Josh. I'm interested in the furniture industry, and certainly in terms of the traditional supply chain, it's multi-layered, complex, and quite archaic in that sense. Obviously, a lot of furniture is designed in one place and then requires a certain amount of different skills from around the world to produce that particular item. How do you see that the cutting out logistics and trying to simplify that and bring costs down in a market where you're producing big bulky goods which often that are expensive to produce in the West often and increasingly coming from China? How do you see that changing in the future?
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the areas where you have some issues. Things like Tupperware is a similar problem, very different industry, but a similar problem. You ship empty boxes. So how do you make that work? With furniture, I think, although I'm sure everybody here will help me to say this, that flat pack is actually the answer even for boutique furniture. Because the advantage of having a very flexible and fast supply chain is actually you don't need so much storage space. So the cost you save there, you can then afford to do local assembly labour and have, really nice crafted furniture, but actually it's not assembled when it gets in a container. You don't put 4 chairs in a container. You can get 100 chairs in a container, or 10 chairs on a pallet, as opposed to having just one per pallet and being very limited and then having to stock these things. You can fit 100 in the warehouse space for 10, and the cost of assembly is high, but you save that in the amount of storage space you have. I think that's kind of how we're starting to see supply chain evolve for larger items and more boutique items as well.
Thank you.
Hi, a question for Sebastian actually. I'm interested in your relationship with Benchmark. How did that come about? How was it them approaching you to kind of get some new designs in, or was it you needing some bigger sort of manufacturing? How can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Actually, it came about through, I submitted my graduate piece, The Chair, to the Wood Awards, and it won, and Sean was the head judge. So sorry, it's kind of it's not, you don't. I think actually I remember receiving a business card from somebody at Benchmark when I was at New Designers, but I started this whole thing and I was very naive, and I just kind of thought, well, I don't want other people to make my furniture. Who are these guys? And sort of like put it in a box, thinking it's probably quite important, but sort of ignoring it. So I think I could have probably got in touch with them, and I probably could have pursued that. I know that there are a lot of young designers that do work with them, and they're often picked up at exhibitions. They go around looking for people to work with, but it was the Wood Awards, and came from that.
Well, actually, on this question, Sebastian, I'd like to ask you, why did you choose to be a manufacturer in the UK?
For me, as I kind of said at the beginning, I think I like making stuff. So I didn't sort of sit down and think, okay, I'm going to design a business and I'm going to develop a business plan and I'm gonna build everything around the plan. I just started. I actually exhibited my graduate pieces in a shop in Paris, bought 24, and I found myself in business. I didn't sort of set out to do that. So I suppose if I were a really clever entrepreneur, I'd probably do things really differently. But actually, I really like doing what I do, and I also believe that the UK can manufacture things. I think that if you're clever if you design the production, and kind of, as just Josh's specialism is to sort of think about, question why that is made that way. And if you can redesign the production of things, which we do to an extent, and when I work with Benchmark, we try to simplify it as much as possible, adding value and texture and quality to something which is actually, not extremely difficult to make. So I think the UK can manufacture stuff.
This is a message for Josh and Sebastian. Mainly Josh to start with. I'm over here, all right? When you're 15 and you had all these design ideas and you wanted to sort of realise those ideas, where did the funding come from? And also, Sebastian, how did you go from being a sort of sole trader, I'm a sole trader like you are, in the same field, into more manufacture? Where did you look at funding? So both of you, obviously you're 15 and you suddenly go into manufacture and supply chains. How did you realise that?
Well, there wasn't any funding. There was no formal amount of money that was dropped to me. I had, a bit of pocket money from a paper round, but it was actually getting involved in consultancy work very, very quickly. Trying to just spare parts for dishwashers. Like silly little things that would be 50 quid here, 100 quid here, and that snowballed. But there was no formal effort to fund it. It was a hobby that was just spending what I would have spent on, I don't know, sweets. What a 15-year-old spend on alcohol is now spent on manufacturing.
For me, same thing probably. I mean, I when I graduated, I borrowed some money and not very much, a couple of £1,000, and bought some very basic machinery. And when I first started my business, I used to fit reclaimed parquet floors, which was quite good money. And so I used to do that sort of 2 or 3 days a week, and then the other 2 I'd sort of go back in the workshop and work evenings, come home from a floor job and get back in the workshop. And I kind of doubled it up part-time for a while until I had the equipment that I needed to kind of make furniture. When I say we manufacture, we don't have anything like what Benchmark have. We've got a very basic woodworking machinery similar to what I had at uni. But we use lots of things like hand routers. We'll create. So if we've dropped to MDF from the workshop altogether, and we use matchboard. And I wanted to make the matchboard not a cost compromise. So we've had to sort of churn this stuff out really quickly. So we created a wooden box which has 3 routers in it. One does the tongue, one does the groove, one does the chamfer. And it's just kind of an understanding of the making process and using cheaper solutions to rather than spending thousands and thousands on a CNC machine or whatever you might want to do. You can do it with 5 routers in a plywood box if you're really clever, but mind your fingers. That's it.
Yeah, please.
Sorry. It's on. Can I just add to that? I think those are both examples of how to do it right, believe it or not, even though it was trial and error. Because most businesses fail. Most businesses that do fail in the early years. And it's usually because people run out of finance, which is, again, usually because they've overstretched themselves by taking offices, by employing people because they think they need, I don't know, a receptionist or something, by buying equipment that actually they could manage without if they thought about it. So, the principle, again, when you're starting a business, keep it simple.
Well, thank you. And I was thinking, how do you price your work, Sebastian?
I price my work, I think, quite often before I've even designed it. So I don't sort of, it's not like it's not like a free creative process where we sort of, we've ended up, this is nice, that looks like it might be worth £8,000. You design within the market that you want to sell to. So like the Underwood range, it was all very restricted in price, and we set the price points, and it's based on hourly rates. So we set how many hours can we spend making this thing to sell it for this price, and we just made sure that the production hits that. So because quite often a lot of our work is bespoke pieces for brands or private clients, and that you're given a budget, so you price it first. And I think that's really important. I mean, maybe if you're sort of doing more creative, free things, like if you're a potter and you just sort of find yourself in the moment, you create this amazing thing, then you've got to price it at whatever it's worth. But quite often we start with the price point and the material and go from there.
That's very interesting. Yes, sorry, this is another one for Sebastian. Do you do a lot of shows like this each year? Is that how you go about sort of promoting yourself and your business?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I started at Tent, and I've done Tent every year for the last 5 years, including being a student, which has been really good for me. This year I didn't do Tent, I went to Decorex, but I always do something at the London Design Festival, whether it's a formal trade stand or whether I've got like the Wood Awards and the Invisible Store here. I think it's really so important to do those shows, and I find that I actually started my business outside of London. I find that being in London is very useful, which I know isn't for everyone, but being here, being connected in the community is useful.
Is there another question? No? Maybe, I'm sorry, it's against for you, Sebastian, but maybe some people might think that actually business and being sustainable and having sustainable design might be not compatible. And what are your views on that?
Well, I think that actually, I think that business can be good and should be good. Like I said at the beginning, I don't think it's the government's responsibility to sort out forestry in the UK. We should, if we're clever with what we design and what we make and how we procure that, we can solve those problems through private companies. So there is a real opportunity to do good when you're running a business. When people who run businesses aren't, evil city traders who rip people off. You can do good and run a business. I reject the argument that business and sustainability can't be the same thing.
Anybody else? No? So I think I'd like to thank our three speakers today and really give them a round of applause.